Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the FigureItOutcast. I am Adam Koralik, and we are here for September 2017. Welcome, welcome. Of course, this is a podcast primarily intended for Patreon backers initially, who get it right as the beginning of the month. And of course, obviously, it goes public towards the end of the month. So thank you very much for joining in. And now we're just going to get on with the subjects. Basically, what's going on? How are you? I've been hopping around, doing all sorts of stuff, hitting up a bunch of conventions and all that stuff. Depending on when you are listening to this, I'm about to go to PAX West and AVGC, or I've been to PAX West and AVGC, and I'm sure it was awesome. But anyway, yeah, so it's been kind of a chaotic and busy time for me, but I still obviously want to do a podcast and talk to you guys and, just get some basic rundown on news and things. Remember, at any time of your choosing, the list of subjects in this video will be in the description along with time codes, so you feel free to hop around. If there's like a specific subject you're interested in or whatever, you can do that at any time of your choosing. But yeah, so let's move on. So the very first subject we're going to talk about here is very brief because it will have an entire video dedicated to it, but I did want to acknowledge it. The Dreamcast's 18th birthday, as it's legal now, yeah! Depending again on when you saw this, the Dreamcast's 18th birthday will be September 9th, September 9th, 2017. I was thinking about when it was actually came out, September 9th, 1999. That's, of course, the North American birthday, which is typically the one people celebrate just because that was like the big 9999 thing, whereas it came out like a week later in Europe, and then it also came out almost a full year earlier in Japan. So in Japan it's almost 19, which is crazy. But yeah, like I said, I am doing an entire video on that. It will have come out on September 9th. So again, to the most of you, that video has already come out, so you should check it out because it will also contain a bunch of stories about what happened this year, different games, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I just wanted to give it a quick acknowledgement because it's really cool that console has reached its 18th birthday. So really awesome. And of course, speaking of the Dreamcast and its legacy, we're going to pick another subject here that a lot of people have wanted me to talk about. So here we go. We're going to talk about it. Shenmue 3's first trailer dropped. And so people were like, dude, what's your reaction? Now, when it first came out, I, of course, was excitable and everything. And I obviously wanted to see it right away. And I did. And my first acknowledgement publicly of it was I just tweeted out, Cave Escaper Man 3 looks great. And people thought maybe I was like, I was insulting the game or something like that. But it's like, no, I was just making a joke. But, basically, I was of kind of multiple minds because a lot of pieces of information came out about Shenmue 3 very quickly. So I had to kind of digest them all. First was the fact that there was a trailer at all. And just the shock and awe of seeing that was great. If you're not aware, Shenmue 1 and 2 is my favorite video game of all time, my favorite franchise of all time. And like many of us, we were stuck in that cave, waiting for Shenmue 3. Since 2001, when Shenmue 2 originally came out on the Dreamcast, we've just been sitting there waiting. Because the game, spoilers, the game ends with you stuck in a cave. So, of course, they were smart enough in the trailer to have you leave the cave, which I think was, really, really cool. The thing about, so the trailer had the initial just like shock and awe, and I was excited, and I can't believe we're seeing Ryo and Shenhua moving on beyond that point, and we're seeing more of their adventures and more characters and all that stuff. So that was all there for me, and that was all exciting, and it was warm, and all that stuff, and I was just really happy about it. And then of course you take more time to digest it, and you look more at the backgrounds of the game and everything like that, and that stuff all looks fantastic. Like the team they have in place, that one guy in particular, I believe he's from South Korea, who did a bunch of Shenmue mods years ago, is the guy they brought on to the development team to actually work on Shenmue 3. And he's clearly doing a really good job because the game backgrounds look amazing. What people seem to be taking a lot of issue with, though, of course, is the character models. Now, I too looked at it and I went, God, something's not quite right, and I wasn't sure what it was. At first. And of course you dissect it more and you realize the problem is their facial expressions almost never move. And everyone seems to be having a big problem with this. Now, first of all, I would like to, that was the reported story was, oh man, this is awful, because that's what everyone was basically going on about. What was kind of buried was that they actually asked Yu Suzuki at Gamescom 2017, you know, what's the deal with the facial expressions? Are you guys gonna update those? And he was like, he basically said like, yes, of course, like, you know, we just didn't have time before the trailer was, you know, required for Gamescom. So so yes, feel, you know, comfortable in that, everybody. They were very aware of the situation, and that's a situation where, I mean, I think they would have done that anyway. I think what probably really happened was they knew they needed a trailer, a sizzle reel, if you will, something to show at Gamescom 2017 because they were going to be there. And I think they just weren't quite ready to do it. So they just kind of said, all right, we'll just cut it together the way it is and we'll just hope for the best, which that's kind of a more of a Japanese thing. They tend to underestimate the negative impact that can come out of the internet. But I will say the positive side of that potentially is everyone reacting to the facial animations the way they did could have potentially applied more pressure to fix it. But I'm of the philosophy, I think that they were going to fix it anyway. So I'm not too worried about that. But it potentially also had negative impact of a lot of people's first reaction being like, wow, this looks awful, when it really doesn't. Shenmue was always a goofy, quirky, yet serious toned game. It goes without saying that it should be a little bizarre, but it doesn't matter because we're not even really going to run into that issue. So I'm still very excited about it. Obviously, I want to see what it will look like later. I mean, like I said, those backgrounds are amazing. I have no doubt they'll get the facial animations right. That said, it is a major design difference, I guess, from the first two Shenmue games, which makes sense. You are talking about, you know, a few generations leap forward in technology. So, and of course using completely different engines and everything. So it's going to look different. But, you know, I'm okay with that. Once you get past that kind of initial shock, you're just kind of left with, yeah, this is really happening. Shenmue 3 is really coming. So I'm excited about that. And I don't know. I'm really excited. But I am also very wary because it's also very possible in the end the game could be terrible. Who knows? But we'll see. One thing that I have some issue with is not actually in the trailer necessarily. I mean, technically it is. But they announced a partnership with Deep Silver to do publication. And that kind of worries me because I don't know. They haven't really talked much about the details of that. Originally, Sony was going to publish the game themselves, and now they're having Deep Silver do it, which I'm not entirely certain what that means. But the pessimistic side of me has to assume there's a reason for this change, and it's twofold. In my opinion, the reason that Deep Silver might be publishing it is Sony may not have been happy with the quality of the game thus far. That is a possibility. Let's just keep it real. It's very possible that Sony looked at it and went like, I don't know if we really want to put our name on this directly. It's also possible that someone convinced them that we need to do an Xbox One version. Now that's just, you know, up in the air. Like it's you know, that I'm just floating that. Obviously, if Sony was publishing, you're not going to get an Xbox One version. But if Deep Silver's publishing, maybe you are. They just aren't talking about it yet. Because if Deep Silver's putting in the publication money that Sony was once putting into it, then you no longer have to give them any sort of console exclusivity. So but I mean, I'm just floating all this. I don't know. The thing that worries me is Deep Silver tends to publish a lot of games that other studios won't touch. Mighty No. 9, for example. Another infamous Kickstarter project that ultimately didn't really pan out was physically published by Deep Silver. I mean, I know people who work at Deep Silver. There's good people over there. But like honestly, a lot of the stuff they put their name on is strange. And it scares me a little bit. But the upside to that could be that they were excited enough they wanted to be attached to it, and maybe we're getting more versions than just a PS4 version. I don't know. We don't know that information yet, but I will say I'm a little weary of it. That said, I'm still very excited, of course, that Shenmue 3 is coming. I want it. I want it to be great. And the other thing I want to say in the defense of this trailer, because a lot of people take serious issue with this trailer, Shenmue has always had one huge problem, which was marketing. Shenmue has always been a game that's impossible to present to people. You just need to play it to get it. There's really no other way. I mean, you go back and look at the original Shenmue trailers, you really don't know what that game is. Like, no one ever really knew until you played it. So it's, in that case, they're mostly appealing to like the fans of the game already by just showing you, hey, look, you get out of the cave, the backgrounds are pretty, and there's going to be some combat and stuff. Like, that's really all they were able to show you. But if you don't know anything about the universe of Shenmue, you'll look at it and be like, I don't know what the hell this is. And I get that. Shenmue is a very difficult game to market. So I guess my ultimate feelings on the trailer are that I'm still very excited, but I'm cautiously optimistic about what it all means. Because it could either be great, or it could just be like, man, that was disappointing. We'll see. I mean, I'm glad. I mean, I know a lot of people were upset when they delayed the game, because originally they speculated that it was going to come out in December of this year, 2017. And then they said they needed at least another like 6 months, which, you know, hell, take another 6 years if you need to. Just get it right. You only get one chance at this. Get it right. And to those out there who are not necessarily initiated with Shenmue, and its history and all that, highly recommend you play the first two, because who knows if they'll ever be re-released or anything like that. I'm hoping that they'll do that. You know, Sega, come on, you can do that. Hopefully, I know they want to. They've been talking about it for a while, but whether or not they'll actually do it is another matter. I would guess at some point they do. And hopefully they keep the transfer save feature in there to Shenmue 3. That would be amazing, but I'm not counting on that. Shenmue is, it's just an amazing franchise to me, and I would be very sad if they ultimately broke it here. But at least we will have gotten to a third. The other sad part, though, that I was about to say is that Shenmue 3, a lot of people are assuming, okay, good, you finally got the third one out. We've been waiting on that cliffhanger. You know, you'll get out of the cave, you'll do the adventure, and then you'll like kill Lon D at the end, right? That'll be the game. No. According to Yu Suzuki, he cannot finish the game in Shenmue 3. That was never the plan. Originally, it was supposed to go to Shenmue 7. He says that he can condense it down to 4 if he really has to, but his preference is 5. So Shenmue 3 has to do well to get to another one, to get any sort of conclusion. And that's actually, in all seriousness, like really what I'm worried about, is not that the game will be good or bad. I'm assuming the game will be satisfactory to Shenmue fans. Whether it'll be appealing to a mass audience is a completely different debate. But what I'm concerned about is how well it can potentially sell, because I think the vast majority of the people who were already excited to buy Shenmue 3 from the get-go have already bought it. They've already pre-ordered it through Kickstarter and the Slacker Backer campaign, which you can still support. You can still buy the game over on the Slacker Backer campaign, and rather than, you know, giving Best Buy or Amazon your money, you're giving your money directly to the development team so that they can put the money into making the game improved. So that's my recommendation if you intend to, you know, want to make the game bigger and better. But the downside of that is you lose an install base that could help potentially jumpstart the fourth game. So we'll see how that plays out. It has to find a way to appeal to the masses, and obviously that trailer did not do it. But again, that trailer suffered the same problem that Shenmue's always suffered, as I mentioned before. It's a really hard game to make people understand it without playing it. So I wish them luck. I don't think they're there yet, but obviously they had to show something at Gamescom. Otherwise, people would speculate that they aren't working on it or whatever the hell the internet would have made up. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Shenmue 3 trailer. I want to see more content, but take all the time you need, get it right. So moving on to our next subject, we're gonna go kind of go lopsided a little bit on the first half of this podcast. If you're looking at the description list, it's a lot of Sega stuff for a bit here, and then we'll switch out. But this subject actually comes to us by Corey Marsh. He is a Patreon backer. Every month, he gets to pick a subject of his choice. You can do this as well if you're at any point interested. You can join the Patreon or upgrade your pledge, whatever you want to do, and you can pick a subject. I'll talk to you. We'll figure out a subject you like, and then we'll go from there. So in this case, Corey wanted to talk about Sonic Mania. He just said, talk about Sonic Mania, whatever you got to say about it. And I'm like, okay. Now, first of all, I have to make it very clear to all of you, I have not played Sonic Mania. And unfortunately, that's kind of going to be my standpoint. Sonic Mania is one of these games that is actually hurting me because I've seen the reception for it. It's great. Everyone says the game is awesome. It's like the first time a Sonic game has been really good in a really, really long time. And a large part of that is, much like Shenmue 3, even though that wasn't actually being made by Sega, in this case, Sonic Mania is largely developed by a guy who made a bunch of his own Sonic games. Like, you know, on PC, he was just outshining Sega themselves. I think it was a story a few years ago where it was like Sonic Episode 4 Part 2 or whatever came out, and that game was poorly received, and at the same time this dude made his own Sonic game that went public for free because he couldn't charge for it, and everyone said that game was infinitely better than Sega's own game. So what did Sega do? They hired the guy and said, come make a Sonic game for us. That's a smart move. That's a big difference between the ideology of both Nintendo and Sega, right? It's like one side hires the people that outshine them, the other like puts, you know, YouTube content ID claims on the other stuff. But anyway, so the game is getting amazing reception, which is fantastic. And the thing about its release is, sadly, it was digital only. Now, except for there were like collector's editions that came out on the Switch, the Xbox One, the PS4. It comes with a Sonic statue where he's standing on top of a Genesis, like a little fake Genesis cartridge, a ring, all this other stuff. It looks like an awesome collector's set, but none of them come with a disc, or in the Switch's case, like a little, you know, cart. And that's where I draw the line, because I know a lot of you guys know, like, I'm strictly a physical media gamer. I will not play stuff on digital. I won't support it. This is one of those instances where I actually am like, fuck, because that really sucks. Because obviously I would love to play it. I'm a big time Sonic fan, especially older Sonic stuff, and obviously this game is quality. But, you know, you got to draw the line somewhere on what you do. And I'm sure a lot of you out there simply disagree with that position, and that's fine. But we all have our own rules about, like, what we will or won't play, what we will and won't support, all that kind of stuff. And that's where I stand. And it makes me sad, but I'm also hoping that basically the surprise success of this game is enough for Sega to realize, like, maybe we should release a physical edition of this. It's very possible. Plus, Sonic games tend to get re-released 1,000 times over. So I won't be surprised if this ends up physically on something at some point. And I will wait. I'm a very patient person. So that's kind of my position on it. The other thing that was kind of annoying people about it, the PC version of this game, which I believe the PC version also, strangely enough, had a collector's edition with all the same stuff, but again, no disc, was, although in the case of a PC, that one I get. But the PC version had online always, like, DRM, and a lot of people were upset about that, so Sega went ahead and patched it and removed it, so now you don't have to worry about that either. So, yeah, the game itself has been very gamer-friendly to the classic, you know, Sega fanatic gamer in every conceivable way, including all this awesome merch that comes with it, save for one, which is an actual copy of the game. And I gotta say, like, I draw the line there. Like, sure, I'd love to get the whole collector set, but really, if you gave me the choice between that with a digital code, or, like, you know, just a normal copy of the game with a normal disc or a normal cart in the case of the Switch, that's what I would have done. And for the record, I would have picked up the Switch version. I think that would have been the way to go for me, but what are you gonna do? I didn't have that luxury. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Sonic Mania for now, and if it ever gets a physical edition, hell yeah, I'll pick that shit up and I will play that, and I will probably enjoy the hell out of myself. So that'll be awesome. Thank you, Corey, for that particular subject. Now, next up on our list of Sega stuff, basically, which is it was unintentional, and then I just kind of organized it based on this. So there's been a lot of Yakuza news lately, which has been really very cool. Now, Yakuza, if you're not familiar, is pretty much the only game that Sega seems to care about making anymore. Like, yes, they obviously made Sonic Mania, but they more or less just kind of told other people to do that. In the case of Yakuza, that's like every internal Sega development team just puts all their assets into Sega. Like, hey, you got an idea for a racing game? Put it in a Yakuza game. You have an idea for, like, some sort of sports game? Put it inside of a Yakuza game. That's why Yakuza has like a bazillion puzzle games. Because Yakuza does extremely well in Japan, and finally it's getting some recognition over here. Sega made a few efforts over the years to put out the Yakuza franchise in the West, but the West never really received it all that well. Until lately, it seems to be doing a little better, which is very nice, because it deserves it. It's awesome. On my other channel, on Game Society, we play Yakuza 0 a lot, could do comedy videos on it. It's an amazing game for that purpose. And it's also just a fun game in general. But lately, there's been tons of new news. So what's been going on is Yakuza Kiwami just came out in North America. Well, at the time I record this, it just came out. And Yakuza Kiwami is a complete from the ground up remake of Yakuza 1 for the PS2. It's being, of course, remade for the PS4. At the same time, that particular remake has been out in Japan for like a year. I remember when I was in Osaka back in April of 2017, it was already out. Like, it was there. Like, you could get it easily. It was even on the PS3 as well. Yakuza Kiwami 2, however, was just announced, which would be the remake of Yakuza 2. Funny enough, Yakuza 2 got a re-release on the PlayStation 2, I believe through GameStop, like 6 months ago. Like, they printed new copies of Yakuza 2 for the PlayStation 2 to sell through GameStop. That's how weird things are for Yakuza right now. But anyway, so they announced a full-up, ground-up remake of Yakuza 2. I assume it'll come out in Japan sometime in 2018, and I'm assuming we'll see it in, like, 2019, if I had to guess. But I don't know that for sure. But I think it's cool that they're doing that because, obviously, when you want to go back and play the Yakuza stuff, the first two are kind of the hardest ones to do because you're jumping back really far. And they got HD re-releases on the Wii U and the PS3, but only in Japan. So having full-on remakes like this is pretty nice. Early reviews of Kiwami said it's pretty good. So I'm looking forward to Kiwami 2 as well. And, of course, Yakuza 6 is still around the corner. It's again, that one also has been out in Japan for quite some time, but in here it hasn't come out yet. I believe it comes out in like February, something like that, of 2018, which is why I think that Kiwami 2 we probably won't see until 2019. Still, it's good to know that they're all coming, and there's a lot of spin-offs. I don't even know, like, because it's all in Japanese, but there's more spin-off games that might stay just to Japan. Like, we got one. I think the only one we ever got was Yakuza Dead Souls for the PS3. But there's other weird spin-off ones that Japan only got, and then they announced new ones, so I don't know if we'll end up with any of those. I think we might just kind of get just the main series with the exception of Dead Souls. Yakuza 5, though, is still the one that annoys me the most, because Yakuza 5 came out physically in Japan years ago. And it wasn't until like last year or the year before that Sega finally released it here, but they did it digitally only. And as mentioned with Sonic Mania, I'm not going to support that. I just won't. And so I've been hoping for a long time that they would get some sort of physical edition. And apparently Sega is just not interested in doing a physical edition for the PS3. There's been a lot of companies like Limited Run Games and others that have approached them about it, taking care of publishing, but Sega won't do it. But there's a little new bit of hope on the horizon. There's a bunch of rumors out there right now that Yakuza basically might get remakes of everything from 3 through 5 for the PS4, or at least remastered PS4 editions, because it's an opportunity to resell them, and it doesn't really take that much effort to get them out there. And with the amount of PS4s in existence, it does kind of make sense. It's a nice library of games. So if that were to happen, there would be a much better chance of us getting a physical edition of Yakuza 5 with enhancements for the PS4, and I'd be all over that. So yeah, lots of Yakuza news, not least of which was one not so subtle, not very politically correct event that occurred when they announced Yakuza Kiwami 2. I believe they were in Japan at the time, and one of the lead actors was talking about how it probably won't get released in South Korea because he made a joke about how South Korea may not exist anymore by the time the game's done because North Korean tensions and all that stuff. It's like, ooh, probably shouldn't have said that. But yeah, so that's a lot of crazy Yakuza stuff. But if you've never played one of these Yakuza games, highly recommend it, man. They're insane. I mean, you could do it in obviously whatever order you want. Everyone always told me, like, don't worry about what order you play them in. I'm kind of a purist with that type of thing. I try to do them in at least story order. So even though Yakuza 0 was made way later, that's where I've started, and I love Yakuza 0. I think it's amazing. So now that Yakuza Kiwami is out, that's logically where I'll go next, and then I'll wait for Yakuza Kiwami 2 and then proceed from there. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. They're a lot of fun. So highly recommended. So moving on, we have a round of shout outs here. These people are Patreon backers, and every month they get a shout out right here on the podcast, talk about them a little bit, and we'll just, see what's up. So this month we have Trey Wagner, who of course is a buddy of mine. He and I hang out all the time. This is true. We actually do. He's a good guy. And every once in a while we go out, we get food, and he hooks me up. He's just like, you know what? Fuck it, dude. I'm going to buy your food because I'm the coolest person ever. So Trey is an awesome guy. I can't recommend him enough. You should hang out with Trey. Everyone, hang out with Trey. He's an awesome guy. And I would hang out with Trey more, but he's always busy. He doesn't want to see me anymore, so I get it. It's fine. No, we hang out still. But yeah, Trey, thank you very much for everything you do. You're awesome. And Rob Janos, or Janos. Okay, at the time I record this, I have not met Rob yet. But after most of you hear this, I will have met Rob. I'm going to be seeing him at AVGC. This is real. I actually will be. Or I did see him at AVGC. And you know, he wanted to go out and take me game store hunting. I don't know if that ended up happening because I don't know exactly how my schedule is going to work out. So either yay Rob, we went out and we had fun time looking at all these stores, or sorry Rob, I wish we could have gone. I honestly don't know how that's going to play out, or how it did play out, I should say, but I will have met him there. So thank you very much to both Rob and Trey. You guys are awesome. Please keep doing what you do. And if any of you want shout outs or anything to support the podcast, support the channel in general, at any time of your choosing, you can up your pledge or just pledge in general. Thank you very much. So moving on to our next subject here. We just briefly, obviously I don't get particularly political on this, and this is not me getting political here, but it is an amusing subject. We just kind of talked about North Korea a little bit. And obviously tensions are there right now. And well, you know, at the time I record this, I mean, maybe they'll have settled down a bit by the time this comes out. That happens a lot historically with North Korean American tensions. But in this case, at the time I record this, North Korea, in an effort, their propaganda department, I thought this was hilarious. They released a game for the PC called Hunting Yankees. Yeah, it's a game about, it looks like a game for the PS1. It's for the PC, and it's a first-person shooter where you have to like destroy the evil Yankees for their decadent ways and all this other shit. And so when the internet found out about this, it's been kind of a well-kept story. Like not too many people seem to be reporting on it because, but the people who did all seem to think, of course, the American perspective on this socially has been laughter. Like, oh, this looks hilarious. I want to try this. Like, I want to play Hunting Yankees just to like see how awful it is. That sounds to me like it'd be hilarious. So I don't know where you could possibly acquire this game. I don't think it's exactly on Steam. You know what I'm saying? Funny enough, according to Steam, there is one active Steam account in all of North Korea, and it comes out of Pyongyang. So the common belief is that Steam account belongs to Kim Jong-un personally, which is hilarious when you really, really think about it. But yeah, so I think it'd be great to try and play Hunting Yankees. I've talked to my other people on Game Society. Again, we do comedy videos over there with gameplay, and if we could get a hold of it, we would totally play that and try to make videos out of it and stuff, because it just seems like it would be ripe for hilarity. But, you know, who knows? So I just thought if anybody out there knows how to get a hold of that game, message me, because that would be amazing. And I just think it's funny. But yeah, that's really all I have to say about that. So moving on to our next subject. This is something a lot of you have messaged me about for two different reasons. So I thought we would take a little bit of time to talk about it. So there was, if you guys are unaware, the Nintendo GameCube. It's a great console, but one of its problems has always been its video output. It has, a lot of its games will support progressive scan, and they can look pretty good, but the official GameCube component cables that Nintendo released years ago, they only put out in North America and they put out in Japan. Japan, they sold them in stores. North America, they sold them through Nintendo Direct. Europe never got them. And in fact, Nintendo went out of their way to disable progressive scan support in PAL copies of GameCube games. Like, Nintendo really, really fucked Europe on the GameCube. But anyway, so a lot of people for years have been looking for other solutions because no one has ever successfully replicated making new component cables for the GameCube. And the ones Nintendo did put out were in extremely limited quantities. So now, in 2017, component's a little archaic, and people don't really want to use it if they don't have to. I'm a big proponent of that. Component can give you a nice signal, but it's very annoying to try and use. So the logical move is to try and get something to run through an HDMI input. Now, somebody came along and built a little adapter you put on the back of the GameCube, and it gives you HDMI support. So when that was first announced, it was a very underground thing, and the guy who made it, he sent one over to another YouTuber I'm sure a lot of you know, named Metal Jesus Rocks. Metal Jesus Rocks made a video about it, and that's when the thing really blew up. Like, the guy really didn't seem to understand like how big that was going to be, and how in demand it really was. So when he gave it to a huge YouTuber who was talking about it, he created way too much demand that he couldn't possibly live up to because he just didn't have enough time and resources to be able to make enough to possibly keep up with demand. But he started working on them. In fact, I was briefly in talks for getting one of these things. But when that video came out, like 1 billion people were sending me messages like, did you hear? Did you hear? Did you hear? Did you hear? And so, yes, I heard. In fact, I'm going to show you some footage of it right now. This is me holding one. So basically, I got to use one briefly at the Missouri Game Con in St. Louis. 4 of them were loaned, not donated, loaned to the convention for the purposes of like a Super Smash Brothers tournament, and then they were sent back. So I got to actually kind of experiment with one a little bit. And yeah, so I've seen it. I'm very aware of it and all that stuff, and I'd love to review it and everything, but it would have some inherent problems, and some of which people were talking about at the time, about how there wasn't enough like proper. I'm not an electrical engineer, but there was some sort of issuing with like shielding in there. And unfortunately, that became the second part of the story that happened later. After everybody started talking about, oh, have you seen this thing? Have you seen this thing? And I mentioned it in my Missouri GameCon video. I got less people asking if I'd heard about it and more messages about, did you hear it breaks your GameCube? So what happened was, because it doesn't have sufficient shielding, I guess I'm using that term very loosely because I'm not entirely sure, and that's exactly the reason. It can depend, if the right situation occurs, it can potentially toast your GameCube. This happened to Metal Jesus Rocks, and it happened to a couple other people. Thing is, everyone now believes, oh, you plug it in and just toast your GameCube. Not accurate. What happened to them was possible, but was more of a freak event. It's not what is supposed to happen, obviously, and it's not even necessarily what will happen. However, it has motivated the creator of it to change his design a bit and work on that. And so hopefully he can get improved units out there and, basically fulfill demand. I don't know how he's going to fill demand. He created too much of it with not enough units. But I would really like to get my hands on one, not for the obvious reason that, oh yeah, it'd be great to have one for HDMI input. Like, there's other ways to do that. You can hard mod one and everything. The thing that worries me about the GameCube adapter, the one that exists now, is not even the toasting issue. It's actually the resolution output. So the GameCube supports 2 resolutions, 480i, 480p. That's it. Now, the resolution it uses depends on A, how you connect it, and B, if the game supports it. Now, if you're in Europe, your games will only ever support 480i out of a GameCube. That's it. There's no changing that. The console, hardware-wise, can support 480p. The PAL versions of games do not. So, for example, the American and Japanese copies of, say, Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes have within them the data for progressive scan. So it will display in 480p if you have the right cables, or in this case, the right adapter. If you have the PAL version of the exact same game, it's going to be in 480i no matter what. It doesn't matter. Even if you try to play the PAL version on an American or Japanese console with the correct cables, it will not work. So if you're in Europe and you're thinking like, no, I'll just get the adapter and then I'll have progressive high definition. Nope, not with PAL versions of the copies of the games. You would have to get American or Japanese copies of the same games. I know, it sucks. It really sucks. But my issue with that is that a lot of monitors and TVs especially, less so with monitors, more so with TVs, is that if they have component inputs, they were designed to have a wide range of supported resolutions, including both 480i and 480p. HDMI is less friendly to lower resolutions. And what I mean by that is, for example, with my primary TV, if I connect, I've tried this in the past with other devices, if I connect a 480p compatible device to my HDMI input on my television, it works fine, no problem. But if I do 480i through the same input, through the same machine, it's just a difference in resolution, the TV will not recognize it. Even though it supports 480i, but only through component. It just doesn't support it through the HDMI input specifically. So if you're looking at your like manual of your TV and seeing like what the supported resolutions are, it very well may support 480i, but it simply may not tell you that it doesn't support it through HDMI. It supports it through the other inputs. So you got to be careful, and that's what worries me the most about the GameCube HDMI adapter, is not the toasting thing. It's the compatibility and how likely it is to work, because it's very possible this thing only works on most televisions with the progressive scan compatible games, which, to be honest, is not the majority of GameCube games. It's just a good chunk of them. In fact, more Dreamcast games support 480p than GameCube games do, which is really saying something. So that said, I would still want to play one. I would still want to get one. The other benefits to it, which I'll talk about in a second, would also be nice, but I would be very worried about the resolution issue. So the ideal version of this thing would be that obviously one that doesn't brick your console, but it would also have to have some sort of scaler built into it to at least like a 720p resolution. Yes, obviously the GameCube will not be giving you 720p native. That's impossible. But with some sort of cheapo scaler in there, at least one that's decent enough, like where it doesn't downgrade the image, it just kind of keeps it the same. At least a modern television, a modern recording setup, all that kind of stuff is not going to have a problem digesting that. So you won't run into these like compatibility issues, at least, until 8K TVs are out or whatever, but worry about that down the road, I guess. But yeah, that's kind of my stance on it, and that would be really nice. The other thing that's really cool about it that people need to know, so internally, the GameCube supports a digital signal. And obviously, HDMI is a digital signal. But what's weird is when you run the component cables, even though they're better, there is this weird bottleneck in there, for lack of a better word. Basically, what happens is it takes the pure digital signal, it downgrades it to analog briefly, and then upscales it back to digital. And that process, that little hook, if you will, screws it. I won't say it screws it up, but it makes it look worse than it could. Whereas this thing actually gives you a consistent pure digital tap, so it goes from digital internally to digital externally and never has to downgrade. So the image quality will actually be noticeably better than the official Nintendo cable. This has been noticed, of course, with internal HDMI mods, which are a tad more stable than this thing, at least currently. So I haven't had my hands on one of these yet. Well, for that purpose of, side-by-side comparison, but I want to do that. So I'm on the record, guys. I very much want to use this thing. I just want to use a later version of it. I would also want to tinker with an HDMI modded GameCube, but all things to be dealt with in time, because my goal with all of my consoles is to get everything running through an HDMI input, and the only holdouts at this point are the original Xbox, the GameCube, and the PlayStation 2. Even the Dreamcast now I have running through HDMI. The Akura box exists, and it functions great, except for the RGB SCART compatible games, but that's different. So this would eliminate one, and that would be fantastic. I know there are PS2 HDMI adapters. I have one. I've used it. It's really not very good. I did a video on it. The only one that's really, truly nobody seems to be working on at all is the original Xbox, and that's a shame, because that one actually cleans up the best. But, we'll see. Maybe in time somebody will care enough to do that. So there you go. There's my thoughts on the GameCube HDMI adapter. Moving on to our next subject. Speaking of Microsoft here, we have another subject from another Patreon backer. It's from Kyle Vaughn. Again, every month he gets to pick a subject. He typically doesn't actually pick one. He just says, like, yeah, dude, whatever you want. So in this case, he and I were talking about, weird console variants and stuff. And so I thought this would be very appropriate. Microsoft announced, along with now that you can pre-order the Xbox One X, which, side note, I'm asking you guys who's interested in pre-ordering that, genuinely curious. They announced a Project Scorpio edition of it, which is like an art, new, like a limited edition, whatever. And they announced an Xbox One S that's like Minecraft edition. First of all, I guess what I'm asking to you guys is, do those limited editions intrigue you? Would you get one, etc.? And then I kind of wanted to explore deeper into the thought of Microsoft and their attempt at limited edition consoles. Limited edition consoles, obviously a lot of companies do them. They're basically like reskinned, recolored, versions of a console. Everybody's done it. But it seems like Microsoft never seems to do it right, and I can never really pin why that is. So, like Sony, for example, then they put out the 20th anniversary PlayStation 4, right? And it looks like a PS1, at least color scheme wise. Granted, it was very limited, but it was, that's a limited edition, that's going to happen. But everybody wanted that thing. Even I wanted that thing, and I was like, I have a PS4, and I would never even use this thing, but I fucking want it. Microsoft puts out tons of limited editions, and they're usually like good quality ones. They look nice, but nobody seems to care. And I'm sure there's a lot of fanboy arguments out there to be like, well, fuck Xbox, that's why they suck, I don't want it. Like, we're not, be an adult. We're not talking about that bullshit. No fanboyism here. I'm genuinely curious why anyone out there thinks that Xbox limited edition stuff just doesn't intrigue people. And I know that's a little weird coming from me because I have a bunch of limited edition original Xboxes. You know, I've got the blue, that's the hardest one. I've got the blue Canadian Bell one. I've got the Mountain Dew one. I've got the debug kit. You know, I've got a bunch of weird ones. And but that's me. In that case, I mostly got them because I could get them for cheap because nobody wanted them. The 360 had a bunch of like random limited editions. The only one of those I have is the Star Wars one, and I don't really care much about it. You know, I don't know why I even really got it. And Xbox One, I have the Day One edition original Xbox One, but that's not really a special edition. And I don't have an answer to this question. I'm asking you guys. It's more like an exploratory thing. I just don't get why Microsoft in general doesn't seem to do. I can't even say they're doing a bad job because they do make these quality limited editions, but maybe it's, do they do too many of them? And do they do too many of them in too big of numbers? Or do they just find a really bad way to make them appealing to people? Like in the case of these two that we're talking about that are recent, the Project Scorpio edition of Xbox One and the Minecraft edition of Xbox One S, do any of us really care that right at the launch of the Xbox One X, there is a slightly limited version that has the code name for the same console on it? Like, if the N64 had come out and there was also this other version that said Ultra 64 just to be a weird variant, would that have been a motivator? And I'm wondering why Microsoft did that at launch, you know. An Xbox One S, I mean, I guess I get why they did a Minecraft edition. Minecraft is popular to an extent, but I don't know. Like, I never would have got that, but, you know, maybe that's just because it doesn't appeal to me. Or is it, I seriously think maybe it has to do with the fact that they do too many of them. And people like their limited editions to actually be limited, and they like them to have, I don't know, maybe more of a tie-in with either a really popular game or to be really obscure. Like in my case, like I said, I have the blue Canadian Bell Xbox. Think about how weird that is. That's an Xbox that was only released in one country through one store, Bell Canada, which is like a phone company. And you had, in order to get it, you had to do things like buy it while setting up an internet package during a specific week of the year. You know, like that's the kind of limited editions that drive people nuts, where they're just like, oh, that's the one I want because it's impossible. But the Minecraft one, anybody could walk into a store and just buy. So is that why people don't care? I don't know. I don't have an answer for any of this. It's just something I was thinking about. So I guess if you have any thoughts on that, please feel free to put them down below. I'm genuinely curious as to what people say. Keep the fanboyism out of it. I don't want Xbox because I only like PlayStation. Shut up. That shit is irrelevant. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about just, why don't people, like even people who are super into Xbox, how much do you care about the special editions? Because I like the Xbox brand a lot. But as I mentioned, I don't really care too much about their limited editions, and I can't really place my finger on why. So I'm curious what other people have to say. So we'll move on here to our last subject. This is a movie subject. It has nothing to do with video games, but it's something I found fascinating and I've been kind of thinking about. So I talk a lot about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the DC Cinematic Universe and, you know, stuff like that. I've done videos on them entirely, especially the DC Cinematic Universe, because I have so many problems with the way it works, or didn't work, if you will. Now, your little backstory here. The DC Cinematic Universe, you know, that DC is Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, that stuff. They set it up with Man of Steel, which wasn't a great movie, but it was good enough for a good start. I liked it a lot. Superman's my favorite comic book character. I like that movie. It did a fine job establishing the universe. What they should have done, and I've said this a million times, was the opening scene of Batman v Superman was a really good first attempt. Like that scene where Bruce Wayne's like on the street and he's running around, he's responding to basically all the events of Man of Steel. Every DC movie should have started like that. They should have started with that particular character's perspective of the events of Man of Steel. Because Man of Steel's events would have been, if this was a real universe in Earth, you know what I'm saying? This would have been the most significant event in all of human history, is an alien among us at war with his own species of other aliens among us. That would have been, that point in time, the most significant thing that had ever happened. So the example I use, other than the intro of Batman v Superman, would have been like, there's the part in Man of Steel where the world engine thing is destroying the Indian Ocean. So down there it would have been causing all sorts of chaos. That's a great place for Aquaman to be doing something. There's, all sorts of just, the earth is like going through all sorts of hell. That's a great place for Wonder Woman to be like saving people. Like every single one of them could have started off with a scene connecting them. And then you see how they got to that point. That way you can see all of their origins and yet keep the universe tied together. That's how I would have done it. Instead, they basically went to the Avengers right away by doing Batman v Superman. In fact, they didn't even go to the Avengers. They went to Captain America Civil War in the second film. And it did not do well. Batman v Superman did a lot of damage to that franchise. I've said the only way you could have saved the DCU at that point was to basically go X-Men Days of Future Past on it, where you do an entire movie dedicated to undoing the previous movies. Obviously they didn't do that. They went ahead with Suicide Squad that they were very far in production. The movie was almost done by that point. So you couldn't really undo much. And Suicide Squad ended up being very pointless. It's a movie about a woman who creates says like, I want to create a bunch of people. I want to use a bunch of people to stop a threat. Well, what's the threat? We might have a threat. Oh shit, I just made our threat. Let's go fix the threat that I just made. Like that was not a particularly competent movie. And then Wonder Woman came out, and Wonder Woman was actually good. I liked Wonder Woman, but in the range of like all superhero movies ever, it was above average at best. It was just probably the best DCU movie, which didn't really say much, but it was still a good movie. I really liked it. And now we have Justice League. Now, if you're not familiar, Justice League was originally going to be a 2-part thing, which all these movies were supposed to build up to, and then they were going to have a bunch of movies after, like, your Green Lanterns and your Flash and all that stuff. A bunch of those movies have since been on hiatus or canceled entirely. The Batman solo film with Ben Affleck canceled entirely. And Ben Affleck seems to be out after Justice League. Justice League Part 2 canceled entirely. And if you're unaware, the Warner Brothers ownership was bought out. And new ownership seems to be not too interested in keeping the DCU going. And that's where we're going with this. It would seem, based on all these actions, that what they're silently doing is killing the DCU. After Justice League, they're going to admit the experiment failed, and they're now setting up for alternative ideas. Because they're obviously going to keep making Batman movies, Superman movies, and all that stuff. The way to go about it seems to just be different. Rather than do they were kind of copying the Marvel formula, but not as well. What I guess they're planning now is to do like, look, we can't do that. So what we'll do instead is like this weird spin-off universe where they'll make movies like, we're going to do weird ones like Superman Red Sun. There's a Superman story you've never seen before on the live action, on the big screen. They're doing a Joker origin film. They're doing all these other side projects is what it sounds like. And while there's no official confirmation of this, keep that in mind. This could all change very soon. It does seem like the plan is, after Justice League is done, it has had its run, they're going to basically say, okay, the DCU thing didn't really work. Let's try this. I think that's what they're setting up for now. They're just not being public about it. So the question is, are we sad? Are we happy? How do we react to this? I am sad in the sense that they botched that universe, which is too bad, because I like that idea. The whole concept of a cinematic universe, as long as it's done competently, is great. When you try to force a cinematic universe like Sony did with Ghostbusters or with The Amazing Spider-Man, it doesn't work. In this case, what they did was they tried to build their universe way too quickly, with totally the wrong guy at the helm. Zack Snyder is not a competent storyteller. He's a great director in the sense that he knows how to. He's a very good visual director, but he is not a great storyteller. So he was a really bad guy to kind of put in charge of basically the foundation of that universe. And he did at least an okay job with Man of Steel. You could work with that, but there was no working with Batman v Superman. There just wasn't. It was a universe destroyer. You took way too many plot lines, pushed them way too early, and you also have nowhere to really go other than Justice League, which is going to be also very forced. Like, you did the death of Superman and Doomsday and the intro of Batman, which is pretty much the grizzled retired Batman, and Wonder Woman, and all this like shit in the same movie. It was not a good idea. So anyway, what are your thoughts on the idea of the DCU being shut down potentially? Keep that in mind. This is not a confirmed thing. It's a very potential thing. The reason, in case you're curious, like why they wouldn't just say that now is if everybody knows the DCU is officially done, that hurts Justice League even more. I think Justice League is a project they're just kind of cut their losses on. Basically, by the time they had received the feedback of Batman v Superman, Justice League was only like a month away from shooting, and at that point everything is like prepaid for. You have to film that movie at that point, otherwise you risk losing way too much money. So what they did to try and compensate was they made Ben Affleck executive producer, and they basically said, like, you kind of control Zack Snyder. If he's got like a terrible idea, you override him. And then later they brought Joss Whedon in to try and, refine parts of it and, do some reshoots and stuff. Joss Whedon, of course, making, Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron and all these other films. So that was kind of their attempt to make the movie better and function together. We'll see how that ultimately works. Zack Snyder was ultimately released from that film, so he probably didn't do a particularly good job on it. But we'll see. I think their attempt is to just try to make this movie recoup as much as they possibly can. Hopefully they can get a successful film under their, and then they'll just kind of move away from it silently. We will see. But anyway, guys, that's it for this month's podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, of course, to Kyle, Trey, Rob, and Corey. Thank you to everyone who supports on Patreon. Of course, thank you to all those who just take the time to listen. I really appreciate it. So have a good one, everybody.